That evening, I stayed late to conduct a thorough audit of Marcus's digital communications, something that was well within my authority as a systems administrator conducting a security review. What I found was a treasure trove of inappropriate behavior that painted a clear picture of his character. There were personal emails complaining about employees to friends outside the company, messages to his former colleagues mocking our company leadership and calling our CEO an idiot, and most interesting of all, a pattern of emails to external recruiters discussing confidential company information, including salary ranges and upcoming layoffs that had not been announced yet. But then I discovered something far #the accidental send. My name is Riley, and I work in IT support at Dataflow Solutions. I have been here for 8 years, long enough to watch the company grow from a scrappy startup to a mid-sized corporation with 400 employees. Most people see me as the quiet tech person who fixes their computers and resets their passwords. What they do not know is that I have administrative access to every system, every email server, and every digital footprint in this building. Our new VP of Sales, Marcus Webb, joined 6 months ago with a reputation for turning around underperforming teams. Within his first week, he made it clear that he believed the previous management was too soft. Marcus had perfectly styled hair, expensive suits, and a habit of speaking louder than necessary in meetings to establish dominance. The trouble started when Marcus began implementing what he called accountability measures. He required his sales team to send daily reports, attend mandatory 7 a.m. meetings, and justify every minute of their time. When veteran salesperson Janet questioned the new policies during a team meeting, Marcus responded by putting her on a performance improvement plan. That was my first red flag. Janet had been our top performer for 3 years running. Marcus also had a peculiar obsession with controlling every aspect of office communication. He insisted that all team emails be CC'd to him, and he would reply all with corrections or criticisms, often embarrassing employees in front of their colleagues. He seemed to take particular pleasure in public humiliation. 2 months into his tenure, Marcus called me to his office. His corner space overlooked the parking lot and featured a massive desk that he used like a barrier between himself and visitors. The walls were covered with his various sales awards from previous companies. He really wanted everyone to know how successful he was. "Riley," he said without looking up from his phone, "I need you to give me access to monitor my team's email communications. I want to see everything they send and receive, in real time." I explained that such monitoring would require HR approval and legal clearance, as it went beyond our standard company policies. Marcus leaned back in his leather chair and smiled. "I do not think you understand how this works," he said. "I am asking you nicely now, but I can make this an official directive from senior management. Your choice." I told him I would need to check with our chief technology officer first. Marcus's expression darkened, and I could see his jaw clench as he processed my response. "You have until tomorrow morning," he said dismissively, turning back to his phone as if I had already been forgotten. That evening, I researched our employee monitoring policies thoroughly. As I suspected, Marcus's request violated several company guidelines about employee privacy, not to mention potential legal issues regarding surveillance without consent. I drafted a detailed email to our CTO, James Peterson, explaining the situation and sent it before leaving for the day. I also took the time to document everything that had happened in my personal files, including dates, times, and exact quotes from our conversation. Something told me this would not be the end of Marcus's demands. The next morning, Marcus stormed into the IT department before 9 a.m., his face flushed with anger. His usually perfect hair looked disheveled, and his tie was slightly crooked. Several of my colleagues looked up from their workstations as he approached my desk. "Did you go behind my back to Peterson?" he demanded, referring to our CTO. His voice was loud enough that the entire IT department could hear every word. I calmly explained that I had followed proper protocol by consulting with my supervisor about a potentially policy-violating request. This was standard procedure for any unusual access requests, and I had done exactly what our employee handbook required. Marcus stepped closer to my desk, lowering his voice to what I assume he thought was a threatening whisper, though it was still audible to my nearby colleagues. "Let me make something very clear to you," he said, pointing his finger uncomfortably close to my face. "I can make your life here very difficult. You want to play games? Fine. But remember that I have connections at the board level, and your little tech support job is not as secure as you think it is." I maintained eye contact and replied quietly, "I understand you are frustrated, Marcus, but I was following company policy. If you would like to discuss this further, perhaps we should involve HR to clarify the proper procedures." His face turned an even deeper shade of red at the mention of HR. This was his second mistake. Threatening an IT administrator is never wise. Over the following weeks, Marcus escalated his campaign against me with the systematic precision of someone who had clearly done this before. He began sending complaint emails about my response times to his tickets, copying senior management and HR on every message. The complaints were petty and often exaggerated, but they created a paper trail that made it look like I was underperforming. He would call with urgent requests during lunch breaks or after hours, then criticize my availability when I did not respond immediately. When I helped other employees with technical issues, he would interrupt to assign me tasks that he claimed were higher priority, often in front of other people to maximize the embarrassment. Marcus also began scheduling unnecessary meetings that conflicted with my existing commitments, then expressing disappointment when I had to reschedule. He seemed to take particular pleasure in creating situations where I would look unprofessional or unprepared. The sales team started giving me sympathetic looks whenever Marcus was around. Janet, the veteran salesperson he had put on the performance improvement plan, began eating lunch at a different table to avoid being seen talking to me. I could see that his intimidation tactics were working on everyone except me. The breaking point came during our quarterly all-hands meeting in the main conference room. The entire company was gathered to hear updates from each department head. Marcus was presenting sales metrics when the presentation remote suddenly stopped working in the middle of his slide about quarterly projections. He clicked the button several times, growing visibly frustrated as nothing happened on the screen behind him. The room fell silent as 400 employees watched him struggle with the technology. Instead of quietly asking for help, Marcus decided to make it a public spectacle. "Looks like our IT department cannot even keep simple equipment functioning," he announced to the room, generating scattered uncomfortable laughter from people who felt obligated to respond. "Riley, can you handle this, or do we need to find someone more competent?" I quietly walked to the front of the room, aware that everyone was watching. I checked the remote, noticed that the battery indicator was red, and simply replaced the batteries from the supply kit that was always kept in the AV cabinet. The presentation resumed immediately. I quietly returned to my seat without saying a word, but as I walked back through the room, I noticed Marcus smirking at several board members in the front row, as if his public humiliation of me had somehow demonstrated his leadership abilities. That was his final mistake. You see, what Marcus did not know was that my college roommate, David Chen, was now the Chief Financial Officer at Dataflow Solutions. David and I had maintained our friendship over the years, occasionally meeting for lunch to catch up on life and work. During our conversations, I had learned about the board's growing concerns regarding workplace culture and employee retention metrics. Recent exit interviews had revealed a pattern of complaints about management styles, and the board was becoming increasingly worried about potential liability issues. David had mentioned that they were particularly concerned about any behavior that could lead to wrongful termination lawsuits or create a hostile work environment. More importantly, I knew something that Marcus had apparently forgotten about our company's email system. Every message sent through our servers was automatically backed up and stored with full metadata, including timestamps, recipients, and even unsent drafts that were auto-saved every 30 seconds. This included personal emails sent from company devices, which was clearly stated in our employee handbook that everyone signed during orientation. Marcus had a habit of using his company laptop for everything, including personal correspondence. I had noticed unusual activity patterns in his email traffic during my routine security monitoring, but as long as it was not affecting system performance or violating security protocols, I had never had a reason to investigate further. Until now. That evening, I stayed late to conduct a thorough audit of Marcus's digital communications. What I found was a treasure trove of inappropriate behavior. Personal emails complaining about employees, messages to his friends mocking company leadership, and most interesting of all, a pattern of emails to external recruiters discussing confidential company information. But then I discovered something far more damaging. Among Marcus's autosave drafts was a message he had apparently tried to send to someone named Jessica the previous week. The message contained a rather explicit photograph that was definitely not appropriate for any workplace communication. Based on the metadata, Marcus had been typing Jessica's personal email address when he was interrupted, possibly by a meeting or phone call. Here is what made this particularly devastating. Marcus had been in the middle of typing the address when he was interrupted, and the autocomplete feature had populated the to field with our company's all-staff distribution list instead of Jessica's personal email. The message was saved as a draft with the wrong recipient list. The irony was beautiful. Marcus, who was so obsessed with monitoring everyone else's communications, had never bothered to understand how the systems actually worked. I spent the weekend crafting my response. On Monday morning, I sent a detailed report to David about the workplace harassment I had been experiencing, complete with documentation and witness statements from other employees who had similar experiences with Marcus. But I also included a note about suspicious email activity that I had discovered during routine security monitoring, suggesting that the CFO might want to review all draft communications from senior management to ensure no confidential information was being shared inappropriately. Tuesday afternoon, David called an emergency meeting with HR, our CTO, and the head of legal. They requested a full audit of Marcus's company communications. Wednesday morning, I was asked to present my findings to the group. I walked them through the inappropriate emails, the confidentiality violations, and the pattern of workplace harassment. Then I mentioned the autosave draft with the incorrect recipient list. We need to understand the full scope of what could have been accidentally distributed, said our HR director, Patricia Williams. I can pull up the exact draft, I offered helpfully. The legal team decided that the safest course of action was to immediately revoke Marcus's access to all company systems and conduct a full investigation. They also determined that the draft email, while never actually sent, represented such a serious potential liability that immediate action was required. Thursday afternoon, Patricia called Marcus into her office. I was asked to attend to provide technical details about the security audit. Marcus walked into the conference room with his usual swagger, probably assuming this was about my earlier complaints. Marcus, Patricia began, we have discovered some serious violations of company policy in your email communications. I watched as his confident expression began to falter. I am not sure what you mean, he said carefully. Patricia slid a printed copy of his draft email across the table. Marcus looked down, and his face went completely white. This draft was autosaved to our company servers, she continued. While it was never actually sent, it was addressed to our entire all-staff distribution list. Our legal team has determined that this represents an unacceptable risk of workplace harassment liability. Marcus stared at the paper, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Additionally, Patricia continued, our IT audit has revealed multiple violations of our confidentiality agreements, inappropriate communications about company personnel, and a pattern of harassment toward fellow employees. I sat quietly in my chair, maintaining a neutral expression while Marcus processed the full scope of his situation. Your employment with Dataflow Solutions is terminated immediately, Patricia concluded. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings. Marcus finally looked up, his eyes darting between Patricia and me. For the first time since I had known him, he seemed to understand that his usual intimidation tactics would not work. This is ridiculous, he stammered. That email was never sent. This is obviously some kind of setup. The autosave feature is clearly explained in our employee handbook, I said quietly. Every employee acknowledges understanding our email policies during orientation. Marcus's face shifted through several emotions, confusion, anger, and finally a dawning horror as he realized the irony of his situation. The man who had demanded to monitor everyone else's communications had been brought down by his own careless use of the very systems he had tried to control. He looked directly at me, and I could see the exact moment when he understood that his threats and intimidation had backfired spectacularly. I closed my laptop and stood up as security arrived at the conference room door.